Good morning, everyone. Thank everyone for being here today. We thank the members of both bodies, BESE and the Board of Regents, for being here, and our presenters. I know that we're going to have an issue with the quorum today, but we're going to proceed with the presentations and the discussion nonetheless. But we will start off with a roll call. Ms. Blanchard, if she would call a roll for the Board of Regents.
Yes, sir. Regent Abraham?
Here.
Regent Bollinger is absent. Regent Oberlin?
Here.
Regent Brandt is absent. Regent Dupre?
Here.
Regent Egan?
Here.
Regent Farr?
Here.
Regent Baker is absent. Regent Gorman is absent. Regent Levy, absent. Regent Whitney, absent. Regent Markle, absent. Regent Martin, absent. Regent Raspberry, absent. Regent Sam, absent. Regent Wiley.
Here.
Do not have.
Okay, Bessie, please.
BESE member Beebe. Here. Ms. Beebe is present. Dr. Beebe is present. BESE member Bofi. Here. Is present. BESE member Bradford. Here. Is present. BESE member Garvey is not here yet. BESE member Guillot.
Here.
Is present. BESE member Hill. Not here yet. BESE member Lee.
Here.
Is present. BESE member Dr. Moranti. Present. Is present. BESE member Orange Jones is absent. BESE member Romer
Here.
is present, and Mr. Wegesbach is absent. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to start off by recognizing Dr. Moranti, who I believe has someone she wanted to recognize today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to recognize Dr. Raymond Fink from Southeastern with his cohort. Welcome this morning. Would they stand up, please? Thank you.
I would like to recognize Representative Steve Carter, who's also chair of the House Education Committee, who I invited to be here today for our presentation. We're working hard to make sure we integrate all the stakeholders as much as we can in these discussions so we can be on the same page. Again, I welcome everyone here. You know, we have a common goal amongst our boards, which is to provide the highest quality education to the kids and the students of this state as we can. And integral in that is making sure we develop our workforce so that our graduates, whether it be a four-year college, technical college, or even a high school graduate, they're prepared to have a quality of life that we all would expect. So that's what we're going to hear some background on today and some direction for our state and see what roles we can play. I'd like to invite Vice Chair Wiley to make any comments, and then we'll go to the speaker.
Thank you, Chaz. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. And just on behalf of the Regents, I wanted to thank all of you for your leadership and your dedication to education, workforce, and economic development in the state. We've had a long history of supporting collaborative endeavors with our systems of higher education, with the BESE board, workforce development, and others. We look forward to the presentations. I think it goes without saying, but as the state requires success, we depend on our students for their success, and of course they depend on us and the boards here and the work that our staffs do to provide a quality education and a medium for transitioning to the workforce, which is what we're here to talk about today. So thanks for your help. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Does any other member have an opening comment or anything that they would like to say before we begin? I will say this: we're not going to approve the minutes given that we don't have a quorum today, so we're going to waive that, but we are going to move forward into the presentations, which doesn't require any official work by us, but there's been a lot of work put into this presentation. It's a very important issue. You know, one of the things that I think we need to do better as a state is making sure we get all the decision makers in the room together at the same time, and not be as fragmented in our approach. That's not to say that people purposefully managed that way. It's just the way government has generally we go about doing our jobs, and we're all busy, and we probably don't take enough time to make sure we're collaborating and make sure we're on the same page. So I want to thank all of the presenters today. I know you've put in a great deal of work in preparation for this meeting. I know that we actually discussed this in some detail at a previous meeting, but this issue is important enough that we continue to focus on it and make sure we get it straight. And I want to start off by recognizing Heather Cope, who is Executive Director of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, who on behalf of BESE has led our effort for today to make sure this was organized and well presented and well thought out. So Heather, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Rummer. Good morning. I am Heather Cope, Executive Director of BESE. Thank you all for being here. I think this is going to be a really wonderful conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing our presenters' thoughts as well as your thoughts on this issue. So today you're going to hear from BESE, the Board of Regents, the Department of Education, Economic Development, and the Workforce Commission. And we are all co-presenting on the projected workforce needs in Louisiana and the role of P-12 and higher education in helping meet the needs of the state. So first I'm going to have the speakers all just introduce themselves so you know who is up here talking to you.
Hello, I'm Susie Showen. I'm with LED Fast Start, which is part of the Department of Economic Development.
Jim Purcell, Commissioner for Higher Education, Board of Regents.
John White, State Superintendent for K-12 Education.
So, as you all know, our economy is demanding a workforce that has more skills, more education than previously. A high school diploma is no longer enough to guarantee that you will make a family wage and that you will have a steady job. And a four-year diploma is not the only pathway to prosperity. To meet our demand and support economic growth, we have to align our skilled workforce with the demands of our economy. And while we've made progress, we still have more work to do. So in this presentation, you are going to hear about our current and projected economic and workforce needs, the contributions of K-12 and higher education in workforce development, and where we have room to improve. The main goal of today is that this presentation will spark some conversation between the two boards about efforts that you all can take up to support this work and continue to make further progress. So to start, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page, especially that I work for a K-12 board, so the issue of career and college readiness is very important to the work that we do. We just wanted to present a definition of career and college readiness so that everyone's on the same page, and that way when we speak about it, we're all speaking about the same thing. So this has been provided for your reference. And unless there's any questions for me, I'm going to pass it on.
Thank you, Heather.
All right, we're going to start off here with a picture that isn't really pretty. This is Louisiana's historical economic growth, which was suffering from a bit of sluggishness for quite a long time, lagging behind both the United States and the rest of the South, which during that time was performing very well. We're going to move on to something which looks a little bit better. During the recession, Louisiana was fortunate not to suffer as badly as the rest of the nation and has been exiting the recession faster than other states, and we are still outpacing the South and the nation as a whole. I do want to point out during that sort of central period where we were experiencing smaller job losses than the South or the rest of the nation, we were nevertheless certainly facing job losses, and our unemployment rate was higher than it historically tends to be. In spite of that, of some job losses and higher than normal unemployment rates, our employers reported that 53% of them were having significant difficulty in finding qualified workers. And the reasons for that were given a lack of experience on the part of those workers, a lack of skills that were compatible with the types of jobs that were open, and the lack of specific certifications in certain fields where that's required. We are now looking at an even prettier picture than that second slide that we looked at, where we're seeing significant projected employment growth. but we feel that it's incredibly critical that we address those issues of gaps in experience, skills, and certifications in order to make sure that we reverse that trend of difficulty in finding employees and that we match the skills of the students coming out of our educational systems with the jobs that we're going to have available for them.
Collaboration, thank you. Collaboration is very important and often overlooked, and I do want to give credit to these other agencies that are sitting here with, we're all sitting here together today, and this is emblematic of the kind of work that's been going on. I think that there has been collaboration amongst these different agencies to a degree which I hadn't seen in my years prior to joining government, even though I was in work that related to government and I saw how it worked every day. That's been very gratifying, and I think that we're seeing some successes from that, as you would expect. I'm going to start and finish really by talking about the scope of the needs. Susie's last slide showed some, against our historical growth, really good growth going forward, 1.6% per year long term and 2.2% per year in the short term, much higher than what we've had in the past, and also significantly higher than the national projected growth rate. But over the next 10 years, what that means to us is we have to find 78,000 people who can fill those jobs per year, about 78,000. And that's a tall undertaking. 48,000 of those jobs are to replace people who are going to be leaving the workforce, baby boomers and people who leave for whatever reason. And I'm going to come back to a theme from time to time that was mentioned right at the outset, that there is an increasing need for higher skill levels in the workforce. Those replacement workers, for instance, take myself, 20 years, well, a little more than 20 years ago, I walked out of high school and onto an oil rig. No training, no nothing, and my pay increased pretty quickly. Today, you can't get one of those jobs without getting some level of additional education training at a post-secondary institution. And we'll see how that plays out, and I'm sure you see it in your own lives, how that plays out across industries, across occupations. There are more and more skill requirements and credential requirements across the board. The other jobs, close to 30,000, are new jobs spawned by growth. Just growth, a lot of it in the near term, spawned by what's happening with natural gas and in the energy sector and so forth. Next slide. This is also a reference slide, since we're going to be referring to STAR jobs from time to time during this presentation. This is a little bit about what it is. It's basically a way to value the occupations that are going to be available in Louisiana based on how quickly they're growing, how much they're growing, what the wages are, and how many openings there are. So the better jobs get 5 stars, and the worse jobs get 1 star. This slide looks like a bunch of information there, but basically what it shows is the number of 1- and 2-star openings by education level using the Bureau of Labor Statistics definitions. These are federal definitions of or descriptions of the education required for each job. And what you see is based, and this is historically what's been the case in Louisiana. We've had tons of jobs for people with a high school diploma. That's what this shows. And the higher the education level, the greater degree the jobs tend to be high-value jobs, 3-, 4-, or 5-star jobs. Very few 1- and 2-star jobs that require advanced degrees or associates or even some college. But what's happening over time is this trend in Louisiana and probably across the country, but I can't speak authoritatively about that, but in Louisiana where we need more and more education levels for every job. So these old BLS definitions of what's needed no longer apply very well in Louisiana. Those high school diploma jobs, they include all of the industrial construction jobs that we know. We know we've got to fill 86,000 of those in the next 4 years. They all require some level of post-secondary education, which is not reflected in this. So you could take a chunk off of the top of that red bar over the high school diploma and slide that over. And that's happening at less than high school. There are very few jobs that you can get with less than a high school diploma that can ever pay more than minimum wage. So there's been a slide to the right on all of these, and that's very significant. Next slide.
By the way, if I interrupt 1 second,
Yeah.
I want to ask the speakers, the presenters, preference. Would you rather we hold questions to the end, or do you welcome them during the course of the presentation? Does anybody have a preference? Okay, so please clear your throat if you'd like to ask a question, and don't wait for me to recognize you. So proceed. I apologize.
I would just suggest the presentation kind of moves toward next steps at the end, and Kurt is really talking about current state. So I would say, frankly, if we want to talk about current state, it might be helpful to jump in and have the because it does change the content of the presentation as we go forward.
That's your suggestion, John?
My suggestion is that people should feel free to ask because we're not going to cover this material.
All right, good.
again.
That's why I brought it up. I appreciate it. You'd be on the same page with me.
I'm looking for a way to extend the meeting because after a nice 13-hour meeting yesterday, I'm looking for another, real whammy.
So I apologize. Proceed, please. Members, feel free to jump in.
Dr. Purcell, I'm going to help the superintendent out here and extend it a little bit because you don't have to answer it right now, but I am curious as we go through the discussion, what is our current capacity? In other words, what's the current capacity? I think what you're laying out here is these are the needs going forward. And the question kind of where the rubber meets the road to me is what's the benchmark of where we are both at the secondary level and the college level is certainly a pretty important question. The other piece is, I think from a state perspective, many of these jobs are in South Louisiana because of the $60 billion plus manufacturing projects. So is there any information relative to the regionalization of the jobs and how the capacity within those regions align?
Yes, so we'll be actually showing some of those bits of information. And what happens is in some professions, it is a statewide market, but in others it's not. Even in education, most of the education graduates are educated locally. So if you want to address your educated workforce, your educated teachers and things like that, you would do that locally. Healthcare workers have a tendency to stay where they get their credentials, so you really want to have that broadened. And then, of course, engineers can be educated at one or two places just because there's so much technology and so much expertise that you need. We're going to show you some examples of how we're trying to connect both the demand statewide and how the local workforce needs are connected. And I think one of the things that's exciting, and this will be toward the end, is how we're trying to actively make sure that the efforts that's done in K through 12 support the opportunity of addressing some of those workforce needs too.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is national data, and it shows you the level of unemployment for each level of education. And those bars are they illustrate they're not exactly proportional. Let me say that. So what you see is much higher unemployment rates at the base of that diagram, low levels of education, and very low unemployment rates at the higher levels of education. That's not to say that all of those people with professional degrees or doctorates or masters or bachelors are all working in their field or in a job that requires that, but they're all working. The other thing that this shows very clearly is the higher the level of education, the higher the wage or the salary. And this, let me just say, this is all workers 25 and older. So this is fairly young people and people who have been in the workforce for 40 years. They're also included in this.
May I ask, does this complement what you said previously, which was you showed the bars that the 1-star, 2-star, 3-star jobs, and historically we've had a lot of 1-star jobs available for people with a high school degree or less, and yet this is saying that that group, despite the fact that historically we've had a number of jobs to provide in that arena, this is showing that those folks are getting less and are higher and higher unemployment levels.
We have
Does that complement each other?
They do, because we have so many people in Louisiana who don't have very good levels of education. We have produced dropouts at every level for decades. The people in those low-skilled jobs are a dime a dozen. So you see a lot of churn in those jobs. People, they roll in and out of those, and there's not a career there. There's no sustainability in those jobs.
Okay. Thank you.
We don't have good unemployment data to the degree for any state that there is for the nation because the samples are too small. So we don't have a comparable slide for Louisiana. But what we find generally is that at the lower levels of education in Louisiana, oddly enough, we do have relatively good wages compared to the same levels of education nationally, and that's because of our industry mix. For instance, those offshore jobs, you could go get an offshore job and make really good money with little education. A lot of industrial jobs in Louisiana, same thing. That's not necessarily true anymore. Our wages at the top end in Louisiana are also lower than that, lower than they are nationally, as you would expect. That fits the stereotype of wages here in Louisiana. But that's part of what we need to address. Our industry mix is changing. The skill levels of employers, even in our existing industries, their requirements are changing, and we have to respond to that. This is Louisiana data, and it shows you, so we can't track the full workforce to the degree that that national slide did, but we can track new entrants into the workforce who are leaving our education institutions and getting jobs. We can use wage records in the unemployment insurance system to track them. And what you generally see here too is the higher the level of education, the higher the wages. And the gray bars are 6 months out, the red bars are 18 months out. And you can see with 18 months out, just eyeballing it, it's about a 10% increase in wages. That's what you'd expect. There's one anomaly though, between associate degrees and bachelor's degrees. And you'll see that for these early entrants into the workforce, the wages commanded by people with associate degrees are higher at both 6 months and 18 months. And I think this is simply a supply and demand issue. And this illustrates where we've had a major gap in our workforce supply in Louisiana. We have a very new, in relative terms, community and technical college system that is still developing at a very rapid pace. And for a long time, we have underproduced the people required at that skill level by employers. And that has caused us to not be able to develop jobs for people with higher skill levels who we do produce. That's been the gap in our workforce supply to a great degree.
I have a
as well as the
question.
dropout issue.
I just have a question about that for all of you. Is that I think that there's also a communication issue, and it deals with some of the messages that we send to children about how we value education. And so my question for you is, what can we do about it? What can we do about the fact that we have a high demand for people with associate's degrees, but a lot of the people who would be obtaining those associate's degrees are going to four-year universities and then not being successful?
I bet everybody at the table has an answer. I'll take the first stab.
No difficult questions, by the way, board member. No difficult questions.
We definitely have a perception problem in Louisiana that short-term training and all the way up through associate degrees don't have the same or don't have sufficient value. And people don't want their kids to take that route because they think it's going to cap them at too low a level. What we're finding, though, is when we do go out and talk to people at the campus level, at every level of institution, high schools, community and technical colleges, and four-year schools, when we show them the data, they intuitively know it. The people who work directly with students understand where the gaps are because they're also talking to people who are hiring or looking for people. And this is true from, we haven't gone to the middle schools, I'm talking about the Workforce Commission, but we have gone to a lot of high schools and school systems, guidance counselors, principals, many of the community and technical college campuses, and several of the four-year universities, and they understand the gap. They understand where the opportunities are, and they're looking for a way to get that message out to parents too. So I think people who are working with kids and are working in the whole job market understand this gap. We have some tools that are out there now, the Star Jobs tool for one, and doing a lot of outreach to explain to people where the gaps are, where the opportunities are, and just without looking at what the occupations are or the skill or degree level required for those occupations, assigning those stars based on the number of opportunities and the growth and the wages. And a lot of those jobs get 4 and 5 stars. And when people look at it that way and realize, okay, now I can get to that opportunity, I can start making a really good starting wage, I'm not saddled with a bunch of debt, and I can probably get that education close to home, and keep my living expenses down while I'm getting that education, that opportunity becomes real. What's very important, though, is that people also understand the opportunity for those kids to continue their education at a university if they choose to. We don't want to cap people, but we do have a really strong exit ramp for people to hit the workforce at that level, and it's growing and getting better and stronger. So that's the word I think we need to get out.
Yeah,
So, all right, I just have a follow-up. So was the STAR Jobs rating system designed with that in mind to change perception?
It was designed to make it really easy for a parent, an adult, or a child, a student, to say, where are the opportunities and what do I need to do to take advantage of those opportunities? So they can go straight from seeing where the high STAR jobs are, what they are, they can click on those and find out where to get the training or education required for those jobs, all the way to applying, just to make it really easy and to make that information accessible to everybody at the point in time when they're looking.
And I'd say for policy people, we've basically incorporated the STAR rating system into our rewarding function of our performance funding formula, so that institutions that graduate more STAR 4 and 5 graduates, they get a little bump. And those are the kind of things you can do with that kind of solid information. I will say that our community college system is still early in its growth, and some of that perception, I think, is improving as it has become more professional and expanded its reach. The regional universities used to do all that community college stuff. A lot of the regional universities still have associate degree programs, and we have a commitment through the Board of Regents to migrate more students as the entry point into the community colleges. Several years ago, it was like probably 70% of all students went to universities first. This last year of first-time entering students, we had more than 50% going to community colleges. So the message is getting out there, and I think that's important. You want to have the right fit for the student so that they can certainly achieve their individual successes.
So do you find that the way that you incentivize it, and I appreciate that because you're using both policy and funding to do it, just because I'm trying to figure out who carries this message back to the families and back to the children, and I do know that there's a disconnect, and so I was wondering if that incentive is enough to have your community college system carry the message for you.
Well, we've actually got a recent grant to sort of promote that with the Board of Regents. It's going to be called Go to College. We're going to present to our board meeting next week. Go, G-E-A-U-X, because y'all spell everything funny down here. But anyway, it's going to be called Go to College, and it's going to be some promotional materials about how to identify workforce skills, how to sort of know what your real interests are and your talents, and then connect that to exactly what the workforce is. And then we have the website, Louisiana Connect, which is a cooperative relationship between all of us, where kids even in sort of the 8th grade can go on there and see what their career interests are, connect that, tell them what they have to do to get to that type of job, and then work real hard for that alignment. And I think that's the important thing, is the communication, like you said, but doing it real early in middle grades, I think is important.
Can I just add, just for everybody, of course, but from a policymaking perspective for BESE, I think everything that Kurt and Jim said are right on the money. But I would maybe even take it a level deeper and just say that I think that what I'm learning on our diploma tour, which is really exactly what Susie and Jim and Kurt are talking about, all these principles, is that we have more of just a core existential question in K-12, and it's not about one policy versus the next. I agree with Jim. We should adjust our accountabilities. One thing that I've been floating out, as we've been talking about, is how do we align with 5-star. I agree we should adjust our funding formula. We should talk about 5-star. But what I'm learning is that it goes deeper than that. I mean, every single policy we have right now essentially is oriented toward a 4-year college degree. And every single one, you look at Bulletin 741, you look at the curricula, you look at TOPS Tech even, every one of them.
I may forbid you from bringing up Bulletin 741, by the way.
I can bring it up provided that we're not in a rules-making environment. And I just think I would ask your consideration of that for future policy, that we have conditioned our teachers, our counselors, our principals, and thus our parents to think about this as an option, because every rule and incentive in the system directs them in that way. And career education, quote unquote, is kind of consigned to a little office within this agency. which the implication being that everything else is four-year college education. And I think we really need to consider that. That's been a big lesson for me coming out of the last couple of weeks of community meetings about this.
John, at the same time we're talking about this, aren't we also having really good growth in admissions in all the community and technical colleges across the state?
Yes, sir.
So what's the issue there? I mean,
well, I think there's a distinction.
They must be getting the message somewhere that it's either more economical or it's a quicker path. Obviously, the admission standards have had some major effect, but cost, I'm sure, is a component. But if the admissions are growing and to the point that we need $250 million to expand capital improvements for the community technical college system, why are we concerned about that issue of their awareness of the policies being driven more towards 4 years?
Well,
they're going.
First of all, I think there's a distinction between the LCTCS and career education. Obviously, that's a very large system that has multiple components, and you'll see in the statistics we'll share later that our dual enrollments are very much weighted toward academic, quote-unquote, education and not toward technical education. So there's high school kids that are enrolled in LCTCS schools are very much weighted toward, or toward all region schools, very much weighted toward academics. Secondly, you'll see that for the kids that we have within K-12, we are way weighted towards zero-star jobs, foundational jobs on the system that Kurt is talking about. So forgetting about higher education for a second, when we career educate kids in K-12, we are really weighting toward jobs that don't even rate 1 star. I'm talking about call center jobs, retail jobs on the system that Kurt was mentioning. And finally, I would just say what I'm coming to see is that if the question is how do we prepare a young man or a young woman for a path to the American middle class, I'm not sure that we should be content even with a system that says we've educated you in secondary and post-secondary for 6 years and it's taken you 6 years to get ready. So while, first of all, I completely agree with Jim that the brand of LCTCS is clearly a really powerful asset in a way I never would have anticipated. Second, to your point, admissions are up, and whatever the policy agreement or disagreements were, there is going to be money invested in capital projects. That's a positive, whether you view it one way or the next. However, it's still taking 6 years, and I still have yet to have a really compelling argument presented to me that we shouldn't be doing more technical preparation within the 4 years of secondary education and not just waiting for post-secondary. And that's overarching. That would be my biggest concern.
One of the things that came up on our board a few years ago, I happen to be involved in it because it was in my home parish, where there was a move. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to come to fruition, but it was very exciting, and I wanted to ask you about it, see if it's being done other places. But essentially what the move was to create a magnet school for vocational and trades in the parish. We have magnet schools all over the state for more preparatory work for 4 years, but this was going to be a kind of a magnet program where you'd have a high school, charter school, that would be focused on vocational training. Do we do that? Is there any effort to expand that type of approach? Not where you just have, this one collateral function of a high school where they kind of do the vocational trade stuff, but where you would have just a really emphasized approach to it through one high school regionally.
I think, first of all, that does exist in our state. I think it exists more in other states. But I guess what I'm learning, and this is stuff that Kurt and Jim have studied as well as Joe May for years, and I'm just a neophyte, but is that it's less a question of who governs the facility at which one becomes proficient. In other words, whether it's the K-12 system, whether it's the higher ed system, whether it's a private provider. The bigger policy concern that I take away from my learnings is that the systems don't always talk to each other when they try to do what it is you're describing. And at the same time, I know we have funding issues in LCTCS with the ability to afford the training programs for the jobs that Kurt is describing as the most needed ones. Certainly our high schools would say that that's an issue. And we have private providers that are doing some of this work, certifying employees already. To me, that calls for a greater integration and conglomeration of those systems rather than continue duplicativeness across systems. And so I'll show later some of the data around high schools. Actually, with LCTCS, you see very strong alignment between their program offerings and what's required in terms of the 5-star job system. Not perfect, I'm sure, and still in pockets, but alignment. In the K-12 system, you see very little. And what people will tell you is it's a question of money. At the core of it, it's a question of money, a question of talent. And we're not set up, I don't think, to achieve the right economies to provide the kind of services that you're describing if we really want to align with the 5-star job system. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think you're going to have different approaches in different places. It's a question of how they're coordinating, though, rather than just who's providing it.
I'll give you
Yeah, I'm going to follow on the question. We've addressed the academic side of this pretty exhaustively, but doesn't our argument begin to fall flat? And if you would, could you go back to the last slide? This is disturbing to me because this is a national average on salaries, and it scales like we would expect. But if you actually look at the Louisiana side, it's flat. What real incentive, if I'm a student out there looking at this, I'm not going to spend the money. I'm going to stay here, and basically all of our wages fall in an associate's to between masters. So we're sort of paying for a middle class without educating a middle class. Let me ask it a little clearer. How does this not fall flat if I'm a student having to pay for this and I'm not going to get paid for it? You follow me?
How does what fall flat?
We're flat.
Well,
associate and below is 47,000, but bachelor's and higher is 76.
Okay, but maybe it's I'm reading this differently. Our wages for somebody with less than high school is in the low 30s also. Our wages for an associate's degree is probably in the high 40s. High school grads probably in the low 40s also. Professional degrees for Louisiana is probably around 100,000, a little bit over 100,000. So there is a graduation there. There are
I understand there is, but it's a flatter curve.
Than the national.
That's right. That's my concern. And when there's a cost that goes with going to school, there's an opportunity cost, and then there's a tuition cost. Opportunity cost being I don't make those wages, as we see in the next slide.
I think you're looking at it and you're making a rational decision, looking at a determination, looking at a bunch of data. I think what we found, and one of our struggles in Louisiana has been that we've had people who have taken that leap and invested that money and earned a bachelor's or a higher degree for that qualifies them for a job that didn't exist in our state, and we've done that to a very high degree. So I think that there's probably still enough of a curve there, enough of a slope on that line to encourage people to take that path. What we have to do, I think, our major challenge is we got to produce the people with the technical skills who can support all those jobs that those other people are getting an education for. And you're seeing a change in our industry mix, particularly in the last few years, that is tending toward more and more fields that require higher and higher levels of education. And Susie could probably talk about that, about the coming industries and the change in that mix.
I was going to suggest my question was probably more for economic development, because you talked about perception, and the fact of the matter is data comes not from rational decisions, but from pure practice. The kid's going to make a decision, and then the data comes from the decision. I'm wondering whether you guys in economic development see our curve beginning to match national.
I think we
Better
do.
question.
I think it's actually an excellent question. What I would say is echo exactly what Kurt said. We need these foundational technical skill jobs in order to support the higher level jobs that we expect to follow. So we're not talking about having an interest in reducing the number of bachelor's degrees that we're producing or even holding them flat. We need more bachelor's degree grads, but we need many more students with some post-secondary credential lower than a bachelor's degree in order to support the jobs that we have here right now. And as a consequence of that, we expect to see job growth at the higher educational levels.
I will say that the professions that we are really big in, which is more the fields, manufacturing, petroleum, agriculture, exports, in the 1960s, you could get those jobs without anything but a high school diploma. You just had to have a good work ethic and a lot of muscles. Today, all those jobs, or at least what they say is 60–70% of those jobs today require a post-secondary credential. So the same job, the replacement workers are going to have the enhanced skill sets because technology has changed those jobs from being a brawn job to something that requires some technical expertise.
And I know we need to move on to presentations, but I want to address that point quickly too. And I think you've all made very valid points. I mean, Superintendent White has made a point that we need to address, which is historically the career training we've done in secondary education is no longer appropriate. Okay, we need to address that so that those that enter the workforce at that moment are prepared for a job that's more than just a zero-star job. I think he's made that clear. Also, and Department of Economic Development is working on this, and I'm glad to hear that she believes the curve will be changing. We know there are certain jobs that are coming, and we know that a lot of them are industry-based jobs. And historically, those too have required not as much education, but as Dr. Purcell just said, that's changing. It's becoming more, so we need to recognize that as a state. Also, as a state, we need to do a better job of leveraging the jobs that we create into higher paying jobs. For instance, if we know industry is going to be hiring 200,000 people over the next 4 years, those should be fairly high paying jobs. Now, how do we turn those high paying jobs into additional high paying jobs? Doctors, lawyers, financial services. How do we quit exporting those talents so that our money, let's give an example, and I step on, you know, we send billions of dollars as a state. We send billions of dollars of this state's money to New York City, to Manhattan to manage. Okay? That's unnecessary. It's completely unnecessary. In the 1950s, it might have been necessary because they had the technology, Today, someone in Louisiana can provide all the financial services that somebody sitting on Wall Street can provide. So our task is to make sure our workforce is ready and developed, and that high school graduates, if they choose to enter the workforce, can get a real job. And our second job on economic development is to make sure we leverage those jobs that are being created by natural resources of this state, which is what our state has the advantage of over any other state in America. How do we leverage those assets into the other service industries that are more white collar, that do require the doctorals and those types of degrees? It's not a simple answer. I think we're moving in the right direction. But John hit another key point here that is a painful one for us to recognize. We have to stop duplicating services. We have to stop duplicating. Okay, we should not have kids entering post-secondary education taking remedial courses. Okay, it's never going to be zero. But why do we educate them twice? Okay, that costs us money. So, I mean, that's why we're having this discussion now, is let's find out where the gaps exist, let's find out where our weaknesses exist, and let's work together so we don't have to duplicate, we can complement. Now, great news is there's more complementary effort going on than probably ever before, but we're having this meeting because I and others, and I know you aren't satisfied that we're there yet. So I know we need to keep pushing forward, but your question was right on the money, and I appreciate your question very much.
All right, next slide. This gives you some scope of exactly what we're talking about. Of 100 students who enter high school as a freshman, 71 graduate, 49 enter college within a year, and only 19 graduate 6 years later. So, to John's point earlier, it's not just about alignment is very important, but we've also got to reduce the time that it takes. We've got to increase the volume, we've got to improve the alignment, and we've got to decrease the cycle time. You know, we've got to do all three dimensions for us to hit our targets. I think we're definitely capable of doing that, but that is a big challenge across the board. Many of our jobs require, and to a growing degree, they require post-secondary education. These results here from 2018, these are from a Georgetown University study that looked at every state. The data that they used was really based on 2008 data that was studied for a couple of years, and they produced this, I think, in 2011 or 2010 there. I think that, and we'll see in a moment, that the conditions in Louisiana have changed dramatically, and our challenge is great. I think our successes are much greater than they were back then. There's much more alignment. Jim was talking about incentives based upon actual demand and so forth. But our challenge is greater too. So if you look at the next slide, this gets a little bit about what you were saying, Mr. Roma. Professional services, it's the second largest bar up there, and that is the kinds of professional jobs that you were talking about. When these other industries grow, communities grow up around them, and these are the spin-off jobs in large degree. But these are the top growth industries that we see through 2020 through our forecasting. The ultimate size of the bar is the number of jobs that we see in each industry. The dark blue is the 4- and 5-star jobs, and the very dark color or black is 3-star occupations. So you can see the relative number of those in each industry. Now, one thing I'll say is that in each industry, there are all kinds of jobs. So in ambulatory healthcare, for instance, you've also got accountants and security guards, and so, it's everybody working in that industry. They're not all healthcare. But professional services is one that you brought up, so I wanted to point that out. What you can see is that a very high proportion of the jobs that are going to be available through 2020 are high-value jobs, 4- and 5-star jobs that we'd be proud for anybody to have. We have a lot of 1- and 2-star jobs too. That's the very light blue. Every economy is sort of built on looks like a pyramid, and there are lots of those in every economy, but we do have a very high proportion of high-value jobs coming to Louisiana. The next slide, this is more about our outlook and how we compare to the nation. And I told you I would start and finish with scope, and this will give you some idea of the scope of what we're faced with also. That horizontal light blue line, that's the national average projected growth. It's about 1.5% through 2020. The the blue line, the blue bar, that's what we forecast through 2018 a couple of years ago, our growth rate. And as you can see, it was very anemic. But that's typically what we saw in Louisiana. That's the very first chart that Susie showed you, where our growth line was well below the nation in the South. That's a product of that blue line, those blue bars, very low levels of growth. We did another forecast a year ago, looking out through 2020, and that produced the black line, and we saw much more growth in our forecast. And then we updated that again in March, and that's the light green line. And you can see that we have now surpassed national growth. This is annual growth. So statewide, we're at about 1.6%, and you can see we're well over 2% in a couple of markets. Those red numbers, those are the number of jobs, the actual number of jobs that will need to be filled through 2020. So if you look at that on an annual level, just divide that by 10. So statewide, it's nearly 78,000 jobs a year. In New Orleans, it's nearly 21,000 a year. Baton Rouge, nearly 18,000 a year. These are replacements and growth. These are big numbers. And as I said, I think for my money, the way to do that is we've got to increase the volume of people going through finishing at all levels. We have to decrease the time it takes for them to get their credentials at whatever level. And we have to improve the alignment so that the people we do produce, the programs we do offer, are in alignment with the jobs that are coming, so kids don't have to leave to go to work. I think that ends my piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So as Susie and Kurt are showing you, we need a lot more from our workforce going forward, and we know that workforce isn't going to create itself. So you're going to be hearing from the superintendent and from Dr. Purcell about things that we're doing in K-12 and higher ed to move in that direction, and then areas that we can improve. And so part of that is about expanding opportunities for advanced and career-based learning in K-12, moving the college enrollment mix toward programs that align with our expected demand of new jobs, and also improving our retention and completion in both K-12 and post-secondary. So making sure that the kids that come in are making it out on the other side with some sort of credential that gets them a good job. And I also just want to kind of go back to the college and career readiness definition as we have this conversation. Those two are not separate any longer. It's not about a kid going toward career or toward college. Those definitions are moving closer and closer together, and employers are telling us that if a kid is coming into the workforce right out of high school or right out of a low-level credential, they need the same level of skill as somebody that's going to be producing an associate's or a bachelor's degree. They need the same level of education, and the kids that are going into college need to have some workforce skills. Those things are not meant for separate. They are something that every high school graduate needs when they walk out of our K-12 system. So with that, I'll turn it over.
I'm going to walk through a couple of slides. I guess I would just say overall that for everyone, and then as BESE members reflect on the policy implications, my sense, having now worked with the department for a couple of years, is that we have a little bit of a program mentality rather than a pathway mentality. And what I mean by that is if you ask for a list of the post-secondary or secondary programs, college and career readiness stuff that the department has done, you kind of get a litany of, well, we've done JAG, we've done ninth grade academies, we've got the career diploma, we've got dual enrollment, and it's a whole lot of activity, but it doesn't necessarily create a uniform system of opportunity. And I think that's where we need to go, and I think it starts with our diplomas. And so I'm going to couch all of this, Mr. President, within that framework. So you see here a list of what I'd call tools. But these tools, meaning our Common Core state standards, our industry-based certificates, our dual enrollment activity, AP and IB, our tests, these things are, unless they exist within a system that builds skills and then creates opportunities that's meaningful to kids and parents, it's all just a bunch of activity. The tools need to exist within one unified system. And our diplomas have the opportunity to bring those together into a system of opportunity in ways that could create great things for our state. At the base of that, on the next slide, is our standards. And I do agree with what Heather said, that raising the level of basic expectation in reading, writing, and math couldn't be more important. There's no way that our kids are going to have these, the jobs, be able to take them on that we're talking about if we don't do that. And one thing that I've learned, whether you're talking about academic preparation or career preparation, the idea of somebody taking a job within the boom that's going on in Lake Charles and then just forever being in Lake Charles is not how we want to be thinking about this. We want their skills and their credentials to be portable. And it's okay in this world if they may have to leave and go to Houston and do a job there and then come back to their home in Louisiana. That's the way things work. And thus the skills that they acquire should make them capable of traveling across our state and across our country to do that work. And that's why these standards and basic expectations in reading, writing, and math are so critical. However, I would add a finer point to what Heather said in one respect, if we could move to the next slide, and that is that college and career ready, I am learning, is not the same as college or career credentialed. And at some point, a young man or a young woman has to make a choice about a direction. We never want that direction to be a life-altering direction where you must make this decision versus you must make that. You always want flexibility. You want to open doors rather than close them. But at some point, you got to make a choice. And I would say that today, our high school system of credentialing, when students make a choice to become credentialed in a career track, too often does not lead to a concrete post-secondary outcome. It doesn't really make someone employable in a high-growth, high-wage field. And just to look at the next slide in our high schools, here are the three most common high school credentials given in career certifications. They are basic computing and customer service credentials, which and I'm no expert, Kurt, but I would say are probably valuable in some respects, provided that it's a good experience for kids. But they are quite opposite the direction of the five-star job system in terms of their alignment. And by the way, these are not just the three largest. They make up nearly 2/3 of the industry credentials. And so for BESE members, to Jim's point about incentives, we have to ask why. So why is this? Well, number one, we have a lot of teachers that are certified in business that can teach these courses. Number two, we, in our funding formula, we weight each of these courses at 6 cents on the dollar. We weight welding and nursing, which are much more expensive, at the same weight. And in our accountability system, you get the same points for achieving these industry-based certificates as you would in welding or nursing, pre-nursing. So our policies have created an environment where there are very rational incentives to pursue these things, even though there aren't particularly rational outcomes upon attaining the credential for our kids. And I think it's important that we look at that. I believe very fervently that one of the best possible ways of addressing this question, to move to the next slide, is through a system that integrates with our private training credentialing systems and with our higher education credentialing systems. And when you go, and I'll just use Southwest Louisiana as an example, in Ms. Bophy's district, in the western part of Ms. Bophy's district, you see a very, I should say, tighter than most integration between private providers like ABC, public higher ed providers like Sowella, and the Calcasieu Parish School Board, for example. And we need more of that in that part of the state, don't get me wrong. But you see a good model there where the school system, higher ed, and the private provider are working to maximize their economies to essentially what I would call dual enroll kids in credit-bearing programs, whether they're provided by Sowella, McNeese, or ABC. So let's look at dual enrollment.
John,
yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Quick. Did I hear you right? On these three certificates, you said 2/3 of the students are in these three, have these three certifications?
Well, to take a step back, I would say that I should have said this, I apologize. The overall, we have very few kids enrolled in career technical education in the first place. We have even fewer of them achieving a credential in career education. So I'll just give you a sense of the scope. We have 175,000 high school kids. Only 2,400 of them are on a career diploma. Now, that's not to lay blame at anyone's, but I think my point would be that if you're talking about a system, to go back to that bar graph that had the alignment with the associate's degree bearing jobs and the job growth rate chart that Kurt showed, it's very evident, and this has become a cliche, it says so much, that jobs that require a high school education but not a four-year college degree, post-secondary education but not a four-year college degree, are going to be the bulk of that growth, at least half of that growth. Fair? But our system right now is educating 173,000 out of its 175,000 predicated essentially on a four-year path or some other academic path, but not on a technical path. And that even where there are kids who are taking a small bit of technical education, it tends to be in fields that don't even rate a star on the quality system. So I think there are two alignments.
Yes, two. You're not getting enough in that area. You only have 2,400 out of 175,000, and then the ones that do it are in the wrong area.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. And the challenge is that I think, and this is, superintendents will tell you this all the time, is that, I was up in Mr. Guillot's and Mr. Lee's district right there on the border last week. If you ask a rural parish, how are we going to align with the incredibly technical work that it takes to prepare someone for pipe fitting or other work in oil and gas pipeline work that's so prevalent in that part of the state, for the heavy industrial work associated with agriculture. The average high school of 300 kids, there's no way they've got the economies to figure that out. It's just not going to happen. And that's not to say that we can't do it. It's just to say we've got to be more creative in how we figure out how we leverage economies to do it. And so the principle of dual enrollment is both for a four-year preparatory curriculum and for a technical two-year curriculum is essentially one of not just capturing rigor, but capturing efficiencies and economies. And so I would say, and I'm open to being disagreed with, that we should think of dual enrollment as less just a sharing between the Regents and BESE, but more a bringing together of our private providers like ABC, our public providers in higher ed, and our public providers in college, to the point that there are places in our state where maybe the best facilities exist in high schools. There are points in the state where the best facilities certainly exist in LCTCS, and there's sometimes when it's a private provider. But we've got the best examples of career education, I'm completely convinced, are where the local managers, meaning our superintendents, our LCTCS chancellors, and our private corporate heads, see one system. And I think the best examples I've seen so far are the river parishes, where you have a great collaboration between RPCC, Ascension Parish, and St. James, and the corporate providers, where literally you have almost a seamless, in heavy industry, busing of kids back and forth from one facility to the next, with frankly not a lot of kind of the daily politics around institutional self-preservation that come with sending tuition dollars from one to the next. I think there is some of it starting that's existed in the Bayou country, in Lafourche and in Terrebonne. I think there's a lot that exists in Southwest Louisiana. But where we are more spread out than in those areas, I don't see as much integration day to day. And that's going to be a real challenge as we go ahead. So we can look at the chart. In dual enrollment, you see that dual enrollment has increased. Dual enrollment's nearly doubled over the last 4 to 5 years. I take that as a great thing. You do see that it is, I think, let's go back to that slide before. In my view, and Jim, I'm open to being disagreed with, relatively low in the technical side of it. And members of both boards, what I would urge you to consider is this term I was very proud to work with the Regents and Senator Nevers on a piece of legislation that aligns TOPS with our 4-year college curriculum. To a lot of the Regent staff, I thank you for all the work. It's an awesome piece of legislation that creates incentives for dual enrollment, that creates incentives for advanced placement, and that aligns TOPS with with our diploma curriculum. I think we need to now focus on TOPS Tech. Part of the reason that I think these numbers are so low in technical dual enrollment is that our current TOPS system does not create an incentive for some of the kids who need technical education most to have access to TOPS Tech dollars. That makes it harder for the institutions that need to provide these courses to afford these courses. And I think we need to look very hard at our statutes regarding TOPS Tech. But putting that aside, one way or the other, for the Regents and for BESE members, you will notice that the enrollments in technical education here are significantly outstripped by academic dual enrollment, which is a good thing that that's growing, but we need to do more on the technical side. You see on the next slide we have grown. It's a great credit to the Regents for opening their doors to our kids. Across the state, we've grown dual enrollment. That means savings for families. It means more time to earn income. It means shorter time to degree. And that's great news for our kids. Advanced placement is another way of doing this. Advanced placement is, in my view, the most validated, purely academic predictive form of 4-year preparatory education. It's the most predictive assessment we have in terms of success in the 4-year college setting. This year we grew advanced placement course enrollments by 33% in the state. We grew advanced placement test taking by 39% in the state. The nearest state in the country was 12% growth this year, meaning we literally tripled the growth of the state that was closest to us, the second-rated state in the country. So advanced placement is taking off in our state. We had 800 teachers trained this summer in advanced placement work, and it has tremendous value. We can move through the next one. And the PARC assessments that we are moving toward administering in English and math represent a fantastic opportunity for the first time for higher ed and for K-12 to really create an admissions and assessment system that goes down from higher ed all the way down through 3rd grade. So the good news is that we will begin testing students on national level playing field expectations in 3rd grade. We'll be able to say from that time on whether or not you're on track to admission to a Louisiana college or not, and we're joined with the Board of Regents who can say, you know what, this is valuable in admission to a 4-year institution, this is not valuable, or a two-year institution, and this is not valuable in that. But I would just close our portion of this, Mr. President, by saying that while I think that there is a lot of work to tighten our four-year system preparation, generally, to Mr. Abrams' points, I think that there is an underrepresentation of our integration on the technical side, and even within it, there's an underrepresentation of 4- and 5-star jobs within that integration. And while we're going to put tremendous effort into increasing our 19% four-year college graduation rate, our team is very, very focused on ensuring that for the other 81%, we are not having kids graduate with a diploma that doesn't mean something in the world of work.
And I will say, just on Park itself, one thing it does is we always hear from people in K through 12, well, just tell us what the students need to be successful in college, and we'll make sure that we prepare those. And what the Park assessment does is it's help define, really what that content should be, and gives an assessment that's correlated to that content. So John's correct. It's a way for us to very early make sure that there is an alignment between what higher ed needs and what is taught in the schools.
Good. Thank you.
As said somewhat earlier about all the jobs that are requiring the post-secondary credentials, the big jump here is this 51% of our jobs are going to require those in the short run, and that's really less than what half of what we currently have. So there's a lot of work we need to do to move forward. So for us, it's really aligning post-secondary enrollment with the demands for credentials and aligning the post-secondary enrollment with regional needs. Those two components can be done by just really looking at the data, looking at Kurt's information, looking at our degree production, looking at our majors, and we're going to sort of give you some examples of that here shortly. If you look at really what our production of degrees are compared to the South, the Southern Regional Education Board numbers, for certificates and diplomas, we're going to need to increase at least 13% higher than we currently have. We're going to need to almost double our production of associate degrees to meet the needs of our workforce to be just like the South mix in degree production. And for the bachelor's degree in Louisiana, we need to maintain our productivity and basically just steady growth over the time period. So what we're actually doing is bringing new people into the higher education system, those students that normally would come right out of high school and go to work, but now that the jobs are requiring additional credentials, we've got to make sure that they're prepared in high school, get some training in high school if at all possible, so that they can go on and move forward and be in the workforce very quickly. So the demand for graduates of bachelor's, excuse me.
I'm diving in here. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why, from an economic development standpoint, these issues are so critical. As we have the job increases that Kurt is projecting, we absolutely must, and it is absolutely critical for us to produce the types of workers that will allow us to take advantage of the opportunities that sit in front of us right now. These opportunities won't last forever, and we need to be able to produce the workers that will allow us to bring these businesses to Louisiana and expand within Louisiana. As I mentioned earlier, and I think really everybody's been discussing, we need our numbers of bachelor's degrees to increase, but we absolutely must radically increase our production of post-secondary credentials below the bachelor's degree level. And in order to make everything happen the way that we envision it, there are a few things that we need to see. One is we need to get people these credentials as early in the process as possible, so get folks moving through the workforce pipeline as quickly as they can. And we also need truly seamless integration of all levels of the educational systems with the workforce. So if we go to the next slide, we've got kind of an example of how we would envision this working. And this is designed to illustrate the value to employees of getting effective technical credentials as early in the process as possible. So we look here at students gaining a certification or ideally an Associate of Applied Science during the high school years, and then with the seamless integration of the educational systems and the workforce, having opportunities to move back and forth between the workforce and the educational system and take advantage of those credentials that they have received at the high school level in order to move into higher levels of the workforce as early as possible. So we put a few numbers in here to illustrate the economic value to the student of getting these credentials as early as possible, but I also want to emphasize the benefit to the overall economy. If we can get these folks into these jobs, we're growing our personal wealth, we're providing opportunities for our higher credentialed students, and then we also provide opportunities, as the President was saying, to bring those other types of professional services to the state in order to serve these folks.
Yeah, I think to me is you can sort of see that there's great opportunity to expand actually production and creation of credentials in high school. Also, those credentials can be stacked on to efforts within the LCTCS, and then they can be stacked on to additional education as a person works throughout their career to become successful over a lifetime.
Dr. Purcell, how do you see the alignment of the timing of the need for the jobs with the ability of the systems to convert and produce those jobs? And I guess from an economic development standpoint, is there any integration being considered with Fast Start and some of the innovative ways to try and get all that aligned? Because it sure looks like the demand is growing pretty fast, much faster than the system's going to be able to adjust.
Yeah, and I think there is an effort. We get additional, the two-year college system, LCTCS gets about $10 million a year to sort of address the instant needs that occur when you have a new business come into a community. And that emphasis this year, most of that money went to Lake Charles, because that's where the skyrocket growth and opportunity is. And that's what we have to do, is be very nimble. A community college system should be designed to be more adaptive to what the current needs of the local community is. And that's been our approach. And I know the two-year college system, they actually have staff at the central office that actually look and monitor all the workforce needs for business and industry and try to address that.
To me, this is some great work. And I guess my next question from a pragmatic standpoint, are there action plans being developed with timelines and specific deliverables to meet the needs that we have here?
I'll give you an example. It's not comprehensive at this point, but I'll give you an example of one that, in fact, we just wrapped up yesterday, the first stage of it anyway, is all these agencies sitting here, along with business and industry and the industrial construction and the plant ownership sectors, have been meeting since March the 19th to understand exactly what the demand for construction workers is and what the demand for workers will be to maintain and operate those plants once they're built. And that's where we came with that 86,300 people needed just to construct the plants through the end of 2016. It's a scary number. We don't produce that number of people in the state. No state really can hit that. So one of the blessings is that workforce is very mobile, and the same people build plants all across the South. So we're counting on a bunch of those coming back to build our plants. But in that 2-month period, 2.5-month period, we came up with a bunch of activities, a timeline, a project plan, and a lot of that work is already underway. For instance, and time to degree, the community technical college system has really done yeoman's work. They've looked at how they produced people with credentials for everything from boiler making, pipe fitting, welding, insulating, scaffolding, you name it, all of those skill sets, and they were built into the semester system. So they have already compressed that down to an average of about anywhere from 10 to 13 weeks for people to start out as a helper through 2 levels of industry-based training, that really is post-secondary training. And they will start out at $15 to $20 an hour after those, an average of 11.5 weeks or so. Instead of taking a year, a 2-semester system, it's down now to 3 months. So now we can do 4 cohorts a year or more, depending on the type of training, instead of 1. So we've quadrupled the number of people. We haven't diluted the program. It's 5 or 6, 7 hours a day instead of a few classes a day. We've quadrupled the number of people, and it starts in July. So from March the 19th, that first meeting, that's just one of many things that's been done by this task force. And that's more change than I've seen in any system ever. And that, I think, is a model for us to look at other programs in other industries that have urgent needs that spring up very quickly. I don't think we can do that kind of thing for everything. I don't think that's possible. Funding's still an issue and will be an issue and relies heavily on tuition. But that kind of approach is possible when the need is there and when we have the engagement of business and industry to make sure that we are aligning properly.
I have a question on the stackable slide. I'm looking at high school, and are you asking or proposing that students should obtain an Associate of Applied Sciences with when they finish high school?
Yes, ma'am.
Indeed.
Yeah, and there's plenty of opportunities. I was commissioner in Arkansas. They have a college and a high school there, where actually the last year and a half or two, sort of similar to what John is suggesting that happen here, is they basically show up for homeroom. They get in a bus, they go 5-6 miles to the community college. They take their last math or whatever. If they're in developmental or need that, they go ahead and take their developmental courses at the community college while they're in high school. They'll take, if they're advanced kids, they'll take the college courses. If they're kids that are interested in auto mechanics, welding, all those type programs that are in high demand in that local community, they'll go ahead and start getting those credentials, and a lot of those kids can complete with at least a certificate by the time they get out of high school. So they not only do they get their degree, their diploma, they get the credential, and they're ready for the workforce, if that's what their approach to moving forward is.
If I can just add to that, so this is the policy framework.
Yeah, it's a heavy lift.
Well, right, so then there's the development of it, how it looks on the ground. And I think that, and Jim is more of an expert in this than I am, but as I look at other states, I do think it's fair to say that the high school career infrastructure in our state is not what it is in a lot of our competitor states. You know, you have a state like Georgia or North Carolina or Florida that have typically large, New Jersey, large county-based technical facilities. Sometimes they even have separate technical education systems for high schools that are run by the state or run by counties. We don't have that. So we have to ask, to Jim's point, how do we build on the assets that exist in each region in creative ways? And this is I totally agree with this framework. But when you talk to local school boards, they will say the issue is assets and resources. And I think that we need to be very thoughtful about what incentives we create to bring them to the table around planning to achieve this policy, number one. Number two, we need to be thoughtful about what local assets exist in each case. And I think number three, we need to know that though this looks like a statewide paradigm, that's really all it is. Locally, it looks different from one place to the next. And even within localities, just to take your district as an example, in Lake Charles, you have a big city that has big assets. 10 minutes away, you have extremely rural environments that have none of those assets, or very few of them. So we have to plan regionally, and we have to, I think, be generous in terms of how we think about bringing together those assets. That's going to be the hardest thing.
Another aspect I'd like to ask about, implying to get a BS on two different career paths on here to follow on Holly's question, doesn't that imply portability of credit hours, and do we have that portability in the state at the moment?
Right. There's been legislation that requires for there to be portability of higher ed credentials. So there's seamless transfer. All the general ed courses, about 75 courses, are automatically transferable between any 2-year college and 4-year, or anybody wherever it's taught. And then, of course, within LCTCS, they sort of have a common metric for the development of their courses, so those things align fairly well. I will say there's local needs, but I can address that in just a minute.
Does that translate to the 4-year universities is what I'm
Yes,
getting
sir. It does transfer if it's a normal college course like English, math, and all that.
And let me just add to that point for our BESE members to think about. We have to ask ourselves, what is the value of a course that's been achieved in our setting in a secondary school versus the same course that's been taken in a post-secondary setting or by way of a post-secondary institution? In other words, oftentimes you have similar courses. You might have a pipe fitting program in a high school, and you might have a pipe fitting program in a technical college. The fact is that, rightly, the high school may have a better program. the high schools will want that program to be in the high school, and it probably, if it's a good one, should be. On the other hand, a post-secondary credential in our state, as Jim said, is portable and retains its value in some way after high school. And so I think we're going to be wrestling for our members with this question, because rightly, a lot of people will say, we want to keep this program where it is. On the other hand, we have to think about what the economic benefit for our kids is post leaving the K-12 system, and that's obviously where the rubber meets the road.
And if I can,
So I can
go ahead, Judy, I'm sorry.
So I can also see the seamlessness occurring with this trend, because if you're going to start freeing up some of those Carnegie units to begin to do what we're talking about, then I can see us already down to the 8th grade level, doing some of the things that they need for some of the high school credit. So, and that's already occurring. So I can really begin to see the seamlessness here.
Right. And if I can put a little fly in the ointment. The question that we're going to grapple with as a state is, how do you pay it? Okay? Let's just get down to the chopping block. How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to pay the institutions that provide the education? That's a question. And it seems like a simple answer. It becomes much more complicated. So the alignment of sharing and allowing the portability of credits is a great one. The idea that we ought to have high school graduates with a credential that gives them a quality job makes sense to everyone. Now here's a problem. Everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die to get there. Okay? And it's a hard question. And I don't pretend that there are easy answers. But it's a question we're going to have to ask ourselves as a state. Are we willing to make hard decisions to create a workforce that creates a vibrant economy, that creates a quality of life in our state that we all want for our own kids? Okay? And it's a challenge. I don't want anybody to respond to that. It's a challenge.
Mr. Roman, I agree it's a challenge. I agree it needs to be done. But I don't think it's a matter of just making a hard decision. There's got to be a plan. There's got to be a growth. There's got to be a development. There's got to be a way to make these changes. There's got to be a way to finance them that's doable, rather than just say we're going to take money from this area and give money to another area.
No, your point is very valid. Here's what we need to show, that the end result leads to better situations for everyone. Now that's the challenge. And there's where we lose. It becomes a win-loss situation if you isolate it. What we need to show is how it can be a win-win. Your point is very well made, Walter.
Right. I agree, and I would just completely agree, and I would just add that I think part of it starts with looking at our current funding and where we are not really taking advantage of some funds. I think we have to start there. Yeah.
The next slide is really the good news is that we don't have to fix the whole state at once. We don't have to fix the elephant. There are parts of it that we can address, because in K-12 y'all have districts. In higher ed we don't necessarily have districts, but we sort of track using the Mike Foster economic categories. But what we discovered when we looked at our students and their migration patterns, 72% of all the students on average statewide go to college in those local regions. So the workforce that you're going to have in your communities today are the students that you have in your high schools today. So what that means is, as you look to address the workforce needs, the alignment, the fix, can be really worked out well with just the local industry and the local businesses, and they've got more skin in the game. And to me, that makes this solution better. Plus, if we can get one of these districts or regions to do it well, I think all the others will begin to sort of see that this is the wave of the future. In other states, a lot of times the community colleges are funded locally with local taxes and stuff. In this state, it's all centralized. What we found the successes to be right now, and the examples that you were given earlier, is really just local people stepping up to the plate and doing some things, either business and industry providing additional funds. Soella got additional funds from local business. We've got economic development provided resources, LCTCS that made some commitments and some sacrifices to make sure we can offer them with the high school kids and others to meet those needs. So the good news is your workforce is where it is now, most of them, and they all go local, except, for a few folks that wander off. So think about that as we think about some of the solutions that will be coming later in just a minute. And I'll give you some examples here. And we have a demand for a bachelor's degree of 110 computer programmers, and this is going to skyrocket, as you know, with all the big computer companies coming. Right now, we only produce a 77 bachelor's degree in a year, so there's a shortage. Look at the regions here, and what you'll see is our demand varies by region, and this is where we can sort of see the alignment. And the numbers in green are our production by campus that offers those programs. And these are the institutions that are offering those degrees. And so to me, that's the question, is how do we make sure that we address the alignment? And we can do this by matching what workforce produces, what their production is. We have to have also some commentary about what new jobs are coming in, which the national data doesn't show. So we still have to have intelligence on the ground to say, we're going to be skyrocketing in Region 5 for this also, and it doesn't show up on the map yet. And you can sort of see for this one up above, to leave the state, a third of those guys are leaving the state right now. So hopefully with IBM coming, those guys will find an opportunity to stay here, right here in Baton Rouge, hopefully, and address our needs for IBM. Let's go to one chart. Next chart is on associate degree. Let's think about the dental hygienists. You got 70. We produce 69. That sounds pretty good. Let's see where they are in the state. Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
I want to go back to see that I'm understanding this graphic here. The map, computer programs.
Yes,
that
ma'am.
would be the Lafayette region.
Yes.
0% degrees produced for computer
Right.
programs.
Yeah. Just for what we would code hardcore as computer programming. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a program that's similar, but it may have a different name.
Well, like the university, UL, at Lafayette,
Right.
would not have.
They may have one. It may not be exactly as identified here because there's all these little subsets of careers, and we're sort of aligning them with what the job opportunities are. So they may have something in management information systems. They may have something in something else. But you talk about computer programmers, hardcore, that's slightly different. So, and if you talk to people who are computer programmers, a computer programmer is very different than a management information person. And I taught graduate management information stuff. And there's people taking those programs that don't know how to program, and they don't want to be a programmer. They just want to supervise programmers. So it's a different skill set. So certainly, when we have these conversations, we're going to talk to the local communities about, are you producing them? Do you call them something else? Are they in a different metric? And the next one's a lot clearer because it's somewhat technical. Dental hygienists, there's only one curriculum you can really go through. And what you'll see is like in Region 8, there's not much of a demand for dental hygienists, but they produce a fourth. You go down to Region 1, which is New Orleans area. You've got 40% of the demand and 58% of the production. It's real easy to expand that program. I mean, just think about it. We have all the chairs, we got all the drills, and we got all the whatever they got, and we can expand that program fairly quickly to address that need. And to some extent, as I mentioned earlier, healthcare folks don't leave the state. They don't leave where they're educated. So when we're trying to address healthcare issues, we're going to have the educational affiliations, either by sending people from different places to come to the training where there's high-cost stuff, or expanding those programs into areas, other parts of the state that have a higher demand.
So we have a lot of work, it looks like, ahead of us to help produce the workforce that our state's going to need, but it's not all bad news. And we purposely structured it so we end on hopefully a high note. K-12 higher ed workforce, we've all started to do some really great things in this area, and we've got a great foundation that we can build upon. So we want to take some time now to talk about things that have been going on in K-12 and higher ed in workforce and economic development, and then what we can build on. So that way, as you all look forward, you know what's already going on and what we can build on and where we need to do new things.
Our high schools are doing great work, and they've really been tested more in the last couple of years than ever before. They're responding to that quite well. Our graduation rates are up at the most basic level. We are now at 72.5%, up from 71 last year. We have our dropout rate is decreasing. We have an increasing number of students on grade level, grades 3 through 11. As I said, we increased AP and dual enrollment dramatically last year, and our ACT we're now testing across the state, not just in 11th grade, but 8th through 11th grade, the ACT series, which gives us really good information. And our kids really did, I think, much better on the ACT as a statewide initiative than anyone had anticipated. Let's move ahead to the next slide. At the same time, we're starting work on a diploma reconsideration. We're hearing a lot of feedback that our diplomas, of which we have 3, are too complicated, needs to be simplified and aligned with TOPS. Second, that they are not flexible enough so that a young man or woman makes a choice in 8th grade, can't make a choice again until 11th grade. A student can't choose to be on the career path unless they have failed a test in 8th grade. So you have a lack of flexibility. And finally, that our diplomas don't really certify a young man or a young woman for any definitive future other than those kids who get TOPS. If you get TOPS, you're obviously credentialed to move ahead to some specific next step, and TOPS has a very high college graduation rate. But for those students who aren't, whether they go to a 4-year school or a 2-year school, they're leaving our K-12 system without a credential that certifies them to do something specific. And we think that a connection to the real world, be it the world of work or higher education academically, is where we need to go with our diplomas. That'll be a huge amount of our department's efforts over the next year.
Well, since 2008 in higher ed, our enrollment's up by 10%. We have degree completion is up by 32%. Some of those are duplicates, people getting multiple degrees or stackable credentials. And then the graduation rate itself is up by 4.4%. These are all positive measures. We've got a good plan going. The Chamber of Commerce sanctified our plan, so we got an A for establishing a good policy environment for positive change related to providing for business and industry. And to me, that's exciting. We were one of only 4 states to get that A rating, so we're really excited. We're enhancing higher education through targeting investments. A lot of investment. When there was an announcement that IBM and GE Capital were coming, there was also a commitment to provide additional educational opportunities here in the state to address their specific needs, and I'm excited about that.
Susanna smiles every time you say IBM. I've just noticed that.
That's not a lie.
And then, of course, the training centers at Sewella and Bossier Parish Community College, those are really just designed to address specific worker needs in those areas that we know new industry is coming into the state.
Actually, I'm just going to add something really quickly there because we had a question earlier about the role that Fast Start has been taking, and I do want to emphasize the fact that we have a number of partnerships going on with higher ed institutions and high schools as well. We've been partnering with LCTCS campuses on a lot of curriculum development and producing coursework for manufacturing programs, and also assisting with some for digital media and other areas. And we've certainly been partnering very closely with educational institutions for the computer programming and other types of higher end technology needs that we're going to have around the state.
Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I thought this was fabulous. As a career educator, it's very exciting to see this coming together in a way that will really benefit the students and the people of our state. But it tells us all what we have to do to get this off the ground and the changes we need to make. But choice is a big word in K-12 education, and I believe that this, with all of you at the table, working in conjunction for the kids, is one of the best choices that we would be able to give them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I could piggyback onto that just a little bit, I'm cognizant that the people that sit here, first of all, care. So we really get focused on solving problems. But I don't think we've actually verbalized or characterized the nature of the problem we've got in front of us as a positive one. Other states would love to have the problem that is presented here. And that's a compliment to the economic development people, the education people that support them, that's statewide, local, regional. It's exciting to solve these kind of problems.
Sure.
Not figuring out how to get more jobs because we've got kids that can't make any money. I mean, the kids in the audience, pay attention. These people have done a lot of work for our future, and I really look forward to solving these problems with you.
Well said.
Yeah, one of the for post-secondary, we've really talked about making sure our stackable credentials are really truly stackable. Try to provide opportunities for us to have employment and learning, prior learning assessment. If they're doing some skills or training in industry that really does correlate to college credit, providing a mechanism for that. A lot of technology transfer, doing a lot of research for local business and industry to invent something new that we can do. You know, the sweet potato got fancier a couple years back and is doing real well. We have a program called Operation Call Back and Recall, which are exciting. Call Back was basically a program where we looked for our dropouts, or students that had more than 2 years of college or 1 year of college at community colleges, and we went through a company that rounded them up and told us where they lived. And so we were able to send that information back to those campuses. We actually mapped the graduates. We've discovered that for community college folks, they were like next door, and we could get them back on the campus and finish their credential. The other thing we discovered is that some of them were right at where the people go offshore. We've enhanced our adult degree completion opportunities for people down in the area where offshore opportunities occur, and then, of course, enhancing distance learning opportunities for stop-outs also. The new one called Operation Recall is something that we'll be doing later in the year. We just started doing the data, which is actually identifying graduates for our Star 4 and 5 jobs where we think there's going to be a shortage, like in Lake Charles or whatever, and working with Department of Economic Development and having them have those new addresses and contact points and saying, you know, hey, Mama's calling. You need backup. You're needed back at the house to help us move our economy forward. And we're real excited about that opportunity. And for the campuses, they were willing to do that because that gives them a new phone number for alumni database.
That's great.
But it also helps us as a state to get our folks, because you know we had out-migration for floods and those kind of things, and people, when they start their first career, they jump at the first thing. But at some point, you always want to get back and do something good for your home state. So we're excited about that. Co-enrollment, academic program streamlining, making everything as short as possible but with the appropriate credits. We're really excited about all these opportunities.
With respect to, if we can just cover the workforce very quickly. With respect to internships and apprenticeships, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of students coming out of the educational system with some level of work experience. I'm sure you've all heard the discussion of people with excellent academic credentials having difficulty in the job market because of that lack of experience. We are hearing universally from the business and industry partners that we work with that they are very, very interested in working with the educational systems to provide experiential learning opportunities. We want to see as much of that happen as possible. And we're certainly working to help broker those conversations, and we've seen a great deal of interest from the educational institutions as well, which I think is very, very positive. And then also the idea of fostering innovation and technology transfer. Those startup companies don't often have high jobs numbers associated with them, but they certainly can create opportunities for our other local companies to really expand their opportunities, if they can provide a new, more productive workflow, if they can provide a technology element that improves the business of those folks. We can see jobs growth as a consequence of that as well.
Do you have any feel for the numbers of graduates that are out there that have a degree that they can't find current work that can be realigned?
Yeah, I'd say just generally we looked at, I think it's not exactly what you're asking for, but about, I want to say it was 28%. I'll have to get you the exact number. I think 28% of graduates from our post-secondary institutions did not show up in the workforce in Louisiana within the following year or 18 months, something like that. So it's over a quarter of them. That's not to say that they're not here in Louisiana, but they're not in the workforce. They didn't show up in wage records.
Right, and we our numbers, we have 308,000 names that we're working to round up. That's including people working in the state. So 28% of the 300,000 are out of state coming back. That's 66 2,000 or more, whatever the math is there. Sorry about that. My
Close
math
enough.
teacher for my bad math there. But so I think that there is some great opportunity. And to me, it's enabled for us to focus down. We'll be able to identify the highest major the person has, connect it to the industry, hand it over to the workforce folks who need that shortage, and have them communicate with those folks directly. I think that's exciting.
I think there is another dimension to that, though, which is troubling also, and that is, of those who are in our workforce, we think that there's a chunk of them who are not working, putting their degree to full value. They're working in other fields just so that they could stay.
So where do we go from here? How can you all work together or work separately to help develop the workforce that we need? You know, how can we align K-12 and post-secondary, and how can we improve retention and decrease time to degrees? These are some of the questions we're throwing out to y'all. We know that you guys have things that you will want to discuss, and speakers are here, so we'll be happy to answer any other questions. But you all feel free to just talk to each other, talk to us, call up anyone from the audience you might want to hear from. This time is yours.
Well, I know other members are going to say, I want to thank you very much for your time and your efforts here today. It actually is very encouraging. I mean, we have issues that we need to address, but if we solve these issues, there's a good future. So I appreciate that comment. And I'll open it to other members to make comment or ask questions, and then certainly would welcome any comment from the audience as well. Dr. Moran?
So just where are we in the school to work area? That was really good.
We have another week and a half left. We're touring every region of the state and certainly every major market within the state. And we are, let's see, tomorrow we'll be in Baton Rouge and in Shreveport, and we'll be in Monroe on Thursday and on the North Shore and in New Orleans on Monday. And I think the overall feedback has been a lot of energy. I think the one area, and this is very relevant for members on these committees, would be, or these boards, would be that school systems are saying that the policies that incent a focus on technical education in particular, and that fund a focus on technical education, really need to kind of lead the way rather than just program development. And so I would ask your consideration this upcoming year of academic policies that get in the way of this work, as well as funding and accountability policies that create the right mix of incentives for people to do it. It's been a very positive discussion. There's a lot of energy, and people are kind of saying, if you create the conditions for us to do it, we'll do it.
I have a question specific to women, and this comes from the Louisiana Women's Policy and Research Commission. Their concern is that Louisiana young women lag behind entering the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. And what can be done to promote more Louisiana women to enter these fields?
Yeah, I'd like to say just really one of the things that the K through 12 folks have done is incorporating Explore and Plan and the ACT into the metric. In the 8th grade assessment of that, it does have a career interest inventory by individual, and so it can identify any student that has the natural proclivity for science, the STEM fields. So I think that's one approach, is to have the information that's available for the parents, for the child, and for the counselors to be able to look at an individual kid and say, you've got the talent to do well here. There's some other metrics there that indicate there's been a lot of studies that says somebody scores a certain amount on an Explore place in 8th grade has tendencies to or potential to major in STEM fields in college. So there's a lot of information out there with those resources that I think that will change the ability for us to identify the talent out there that is out there.
I would just say two quick things on this. Number one, I totally agree with Jim that we are not making use of data. I'll just give you a good example. We're an ACT state, but 17,000 kids in Louisiana took the PSAT last year. So even though it's not part of the ACT series, 17,000 kids. That's a lot of private school kids taking that, but there's a good number of public school kids. The College Board has a tool where if you take the PSAT, it then says this is what your advanced placement potential is. And if you did well in the math section of the PSAT, it says you should be taking advanced placement math. 90% of schools where a kid took the PSAT never used that tool last year. and the top one only logged onto it 5 times. So we've got to be making much better use of the data that we have to place kids in the most rigorous setting. 2, we've got to create better incentives for kids to take the most rigorous coursework. As Ms. Moranti mentioned, Algebra 1 in many ways is where this all starts. We only have 8% of our kids taking Algebra 1. Even California, which doesn't have great academic outcomes, has half of its kids taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. We've now created incentives in our system to change that, but these things have exaggerated effects oftentimes on our young women in our system. Finally, I would just say that, and this is, I think, maybe the most difficult aspect of all of this work that we're talking about, the counselor system, we are placing too much on our counselors. We just need to admit that. We every time we have a discussion about post-secondary work, we say, well, we'll have to ask the counselors to do this, we'll have to ask the counselors to do that. I taught in a high school of 3,000 kids. We had 8 counselors. There is no way, especially in a high poverty setting, you're going to have 8 people manage the post-secondary counseling along with the life counseling, along with juvenile justice issues, along with health issues, and I know Ms. Hill and Ms. Moranti have deep experience in these areas. There's just no way, and get good job counseling. So we're including in our kind of regional planning process around the diploma pathways a question about what is the career reflection, the career reflective process, the advisory process that you're taking it on, because we need to start thinking about post-secondary counseling and reflection as something that goes well beyond just what we're asking day-to-day counseling to do. And there's no way we'll be successful with young men or young women unless we have that kind of process in place.
And Superintendent, I was just thinking the same way you were just now. I am so grateful for Compass because it's really going to free our counselors up to do exactly what they're supposed to be doing. When I looked at this report yesterday, I'm going to LACT on Friday morning. I must have about 7 questions for counselors. What are we doing to increase our graduation rates? What are we doing to close the gap, yet achievement gap? What are we doing to prepare students, for the workforce, for higher ed? So it's just a beautiful alignment with Compass right now. So I am thrilled with that.
And I just want to kind of further emphasize the importance of that point, because the companies that we work with have made a very strong point that diversity is one of their highest priorities. Many of the technology companies that we're working with have goals of 50-50 male-female hires here in Louisiana, so it's definitely something that's of concern to them. And I'm quite certain that they would be more than happy to partner with the institutions to help emphasize the importance of bringing women into these fields.
Superintendent White, we were presented with Louisiana Connect that seems to address a lot of the issues we're talking about of being able to see career pathways, maybe some self-guidance, an avenue for business to actually talk to students. And I haven't really heard anything about that, and I have daughters in the state, and their schools are not participating. Can you speak to that at all, please?
Sure. So Louisiana Connect is a planning tool, is how I would describe it. It was a couple of years back acquired essentially by the legislature, and there was a contract change, and a new vendor came in, Connect EDU, which has helped working with the Board of Regents to create that. I think that, just to be frank, I think that in the process of the legislative mandate and the contract changing hands, there was a lot of ambiguity as to where exactly it should be managed, whether through financial aid, the Regents, or through the department. And I think now we're back on track. It's being implemented in every school. We're training counselors on it across the state. I will tell you, though, that just to give an example, there's someone who works for me. His oldest daughter has 6 high school credits out of a minimum of 24 coming into her freshman year. At the end of her 8th grade year, using Louisiana Connect, she sat down with her counselor, brought home a report to her father, who is one of my senior-most employees, and it had on her that home ec is going to be scheduled in her senior year. And, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with home ec, but whatever you see of her path, that, she didn't know why it was there, and so on and so forth. And I'm not blaming her counselor for that. But if we don't solve the post-secondary counseling challenge, I think that Louisiana Connect really won't be as powerful a tool as it could be. And the reason is that we really have to understand the relationships piece of this. We have to build the relationships dimension of this into it for our young people, because just setting up pathways, putting out internet-based tools, and saying, well, this is a more rational policy framework for you, young adolescent, to exist within and to make choices within, that's not going to work. We need to create opportunities for more specific post-secondary counseling discussions with people who are informed about what the options are, opportunities for apprenticeships and internships as well, so the relationships piece can actually happen. That's what's going to make Louisiana Connect, I think, work.
I would just echo that. I think it is critical that we put very good information in the hands of students and their parents and their other advisors, so that they have access to it at the point at which they're making these decisions. That's critical, and the online tools are very helpful for that. But I agree, too, that that alone isn't going to solve the problem. We do need counselors working with these kids directly and their parents, but we also need business and industry working directly, interfacing with them to say, these really are the opportunities that will be there if you follow this path. I'm going to be the kind of company that's going to hire you. I think that we need that engagement with these kids, too, to help bridge some of these other gaps that we have. Their understanding of what the world is that's waiting for them. Very clearly, a lot of kids come out of high school, they come out of college even, not really understanding what the real opportunities are. And I don't think we can solve that gap completely just with these electronic tools. I think they're a critical component. We don't have the resources to convey all of this information through people directly and keep those people up to date and refreshed and trained. But we do need that engagement there that tells a kid, for instance, this is what this means, this is how you use it. Parents, these are really good opportunities for your kids. Here are companies that are trying to steer your kid on a path to a career, a solid career. So they're a piece, but like John said, that they can't do it on their own.
If I could add a couple of comments. I'm really glad that we shifted this discussion here at the end towards the counseling. As we've had these discussions on our board, talking about workforce development and sometimes the dropout rate and some of the problems that we have getting the folks through high school and into our systems, it seems to me the biggest challenge, you know, we have great teachers, we have great institutions, we'd like to have better funding, but we have a working model to get folks through the system. But what I think the big challenge is educating the kids on opportunities, whether you call it career counseling, whether you call it retention counseling, and I'm convinced that the traditional counselor model is probably not functional, because to do it in that model would be so prohibitively expensive. You know, how many counselors can you have, Superintendent White, when you have 3,000 kids in a high school? I mean, you probably need one counselor for 50 kids, 100 kids to do that kind of model, particularly, as you pointed out, when they're not just counseling about one aspect, you know, where to go to college or how to get a scholarship. You know, they're talking about life issues and developmental issues. The kids that get in trouble, they deal with them. And it seems to me, I would love to see us as a state come up with I guess a task force or a commission to visit in a thoughtful, detailed way, how do we get this counseling function accomplished. And you know, a couple of things come to mind, like mentoring processes where we connect civic groups, perhaps, you know, a Kiwanis Club or a Rotary Club adopts a high school. There's dozens of other potential ways to do that. But, you know, when we start with what our problems are, and again, as Joel points out, some of the problems we have are kind of nice to have, but the problems that we have, to me, you know, the most fundamental problem Louisiana has is we don't graduate enough kids from high school. I'm convinced that having better teachers and better facilities, better roads, it's not going to help. It's another social problem that those things aren't going to solve. But if we have counseling mechanisms in place at the right stages, and I'm not trained that way, I don't know anything about how that's done, but it's just, you know, an obvious problem that we're not going to solve the attrition problem by having better teachers or better facilities. And I think that we're not going to solve these workforce development, how do we fit, these kids into this career 5 or 10 years later, unless we have a really good counseling system in place. Kurt, I like your point. The kids are all adept at the electronics and all that, but a lot of times they don't know where to go or how to find it. And all of us in the room, whether we're educators or just parents or just around adolescents, we see that they struggle with where am I and where do I want to go and how do I get there. I see it with my sons and daughters' friends. And they'll get there eventually, but I think with counseling and a really rigorous approach to that, they could do it a lot more strategically and with better information. So again, I close with, I would like to see a really comprehensive effort. I don't know if that's a Regents, a BESE, a joint type of deal, but I would start with the supposition, subject to challenge of course, that the current model doesn't work. To say that you're going to have 30 counselors in a high school with 1,500 kids, I just don't think we can afford that. So what other resources are there out there to enable the parents that are motivated to do it? We also know, all of you that are educators, that teachers are counselors every day in all the aspects that we just talked about. Do we give them enough tools? Can we structure, or maybe they have an hour a day to be counselors and not educators? But I'd just like to see us spend a lot of time focused on that, because I think that's the long-term solution to the educational problems. We have so many nice things going on in education, but some of the problems, I think, are just solved by the social aspects.
And I think that we've had a great first step, thanks to the Board of Regents and BESE, for the Blue Ribbon Commission that we just finished on the redesign of counselor education, incorporating our compass assessment pieces into that. So exactly what you're saying, we have to applaud this board putting into place that Blue Ribbon. Their recommendations coming out of that are just excellent. And we heard the counselors at our May meeting applauding Compass, because it truly is going to give them what they need to do their work, to do exactly this and what Joel was talking about.
I think that's very true. And I also, just in my conversations around the state with counselors and others, I think that we, as was mentioned by you, Regent Wiley, and as well as you, Ms. Moranti, Dr. Moranti, counseling is a whole bunch of different activities under one moniker. And when you unpack that, I think what you're speaking of is a very, and as is Dr. Moranti, a very comprehensive experience, a day-to-day advisory experience, a reflection experience. It's not just, well, am I going to take pre-calc next year, or is it going to be Algebra 2, and thus, I don't frankly see that there is a policy that can capture that. I think the good news is every great school does that. In every great school, there's a structure whereby young men and young women reflect on their life and their path in life. And so I think the question is, how do we do that at scale? The way that we're thinking about it, I'm certainly open to different approaches in all of this, is first of all, you don't think of it as separate from curriculum or diploma path. They're not separate initiatives. Mm-hmm. Two, that if the workforce and higher ed assets are at a regional basis, therefore the plan on reflection, advisory, and counseling should also be on a regional basis. And that anytime you say to a set of school systems, their regional higher ed and their regional industry, we need you to design career paths to meet the criteria to make someone workforce ready, you build into that aspirational requirements for reflection, advisement, and counseling. Because you do see in various areas supplemental plans to counselors or counselors coming together to create creative solutions outside of the parameters of the traditional definition. I just don't think you're ever going to get it from Baton Rouge.
You stole my notes, and you do that frequently. That's okay.
And then you claim them.
That's right. That's right. Well, part of this, interesting, if we do a better job of creating the pathways versus talking about programs, the counseling aspect will also become, I don't want to say it's easy because it's never easy and it involves a number of different things, but for counselors it begins to clear up a bit of how do we get this student from point A to point B. And if we've done a good job of creating pathways, that counseling job suddenly makes more sense than just, well, let's look to should you take calculus next year or should you take algebra 2. So, Ms. Hill, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to make a statement to Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Because I'm a social worker. So, and I think I think you articulated very well in reference to our student population that we're serving today. The generations has changed. It's not like when I was in school or when you were in school. The problems that our children are facing today are social problems. And I agree with you, we can come up with all these different pathways as far as to get them there. But if we don't deal with the core issues, meaning their social issues, their environmental issues, then what we're creating, they have to go right back into those environments. So I think the piece that you're saying about the counselors, we need to have more mental health professionals in our schools. We need to have more social workers in our schools because the core issue, it starts in their environment. And as educators, I'm not an educator, but those who are educators, they understand before you're able to educate a child, you have to deal with their social problems. If they come to school and they haven't eaten dinner, they're not going to be focused on what the lesson is today, or if they have to go home for other reasons and their parents, they're not focused on that. And I think we can create a model, because the teachers only do so much, but we can create a model that may help them get to that pathway. But if we don't deal with those social and emotional and environmental issues, then we're going to continue to see ourselves in the same path. So I would like to charge not only the Board of Regents, but also BESE to look at some policies to see how we can work together to create a model that will focus in that area. And I think that would be such a help, not only for our educators, but for our children in better communities.
If we had a quorum, I would make a motion.
Dr. Purcell, I have a question about, since we have you guys here today, how can we help you? I know that Superintendent White will come to us and there'll be some policy things that we do, but what is it that you need from BESE and that you need from the Department of Education for this work to be successful?
Well, I think John and I have got pretty good dialogue. He's a busy guy. He travels more than any other commissioner in the state, as far as I can tell. Within the state, yes. And he will meet me at odd, awkward times, but our conversations have always been real good. I think we've got a good understanding of what it takes to be successful in the workforce and the state. The fact that last year y'all, as a collective, at one of these meetings, approved the definition of college and career ready as having sort of a unified component. But to me, I think it's the fidelity of implementation by all of us to make this happen. This whole conversation about advising and the social issues, back when there was Obama stimulus money in the early years of that, when I was in Arkansas, they ended up doing a thing where they had career coaches that they went out into the most poorest counties out there to encourage kids to think about college, show them how to apply for financial aid, how them to apply for application admissions, make sure they are on track to graduate, have the appropriate diploma. And it was really what the counselors went to college to do. But because we put so much weight on them for testing and assessment and all the social, dealing with mama and papa and all those kind of issues that occur, we brought in people from the community colleges to go in and have a dialogue with kids. And what we hired is basically youth minister type people. The kids that are, the people right out of college who are unemployed because the economy had gone south, and we hired them to go back to their home communities and encourage kids from their home areas to think about what the American dream is about. And I think that the most important thing we have to do is always make sure that people have hope. And if we can communicate hope, they can sort of see what that track is. They can sort of see that there's direction and move forward. But that's the kind of thing we're going to have to do is make sure that we inspire the kids to think about what the future can look like for them.
And then my next question is for all of you. Is there a structure that we need to make sure that we're making sure that our work is aligned? I know that we meet periodically, but is this enough to get the mission accomplished?
Let me start on that one. First, there is another commission, the Workforce Investment Council. It's appointed by the governor. 51% of the members are business and industry representatives, and they're, for the most part, business leaders. There are some associations represented, but it's mainly business leaders themselves. And all of these agencies are on there as well as a couple of others. And that council, by statute, has the role of coordinating the state's workforce development strategy. And it has a strategic plan, and elements of that plan delve into what all of us do. And separate from that, the 5 agencies represented here, we have a sort of a workforce cabinet where we get together and collaborate and make sure that our strategies are aligned as agencies, and I think it's been very helpful for me. I want to say something about your last question, though. The Workforce Commission is only successful, really, if these other agencies are successful. We can't take people who are undereducated or have the wrong education and prepare them for work. There's not enough money to do that when they're in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. It has to start where all of these folks work. The greatest gap, as we've discussed already, is people with that, I don't like the term, but that middle skill level between high school and a bachelor's degree. The greatest impediment for people to get that is tuition. We have a huge resource of people in Louisiana, 600,000 or so adults who don't have a GED or a high school diploma. A large percentage of those folks, now that they're adults, they understand what responsibility is and what it takes to pay a note on something, want to get back into the workforce, and it's very, very difficult for them to do that. So for my money, if we're talking about, and funding is a very important issue, and we shouldn't hide from it. I think that for my money, we've got capacity issues that are being looked at and being addressed very well. We need to get bigger in a lot of areas. We need better equipment. We need better labs and all that, for sure. But the gap is in getting people that middle skill credential. So doing more of it while they're in high school is very important, but when they're out of high school, we have a ton of people who could help us meet all of these demands at the right level if they could afford to go get that training. And short-term certificates are in the highest demand. So we don't have a program, I don't know that anybody has a program that would provide student loans for short-term certificates, for instance. Now, somebody can go to school for 13 weeks or 10 weeks and come out making 15 to 20 bucks an hour, and within 2 years get up to $28 to $30 an hour. They ought to be able to pay back a loan for the tuition of about $1,500 for that first stage and probably another $1,500 bucks for the rest of it. That ought to be possible. And I think that if we had a program like that, that put some faith in those people's ability to get a job at the end of the day and pay back that money, I think we would unleash a torrent of people on our education and training systems that would help bite off a tremendous chunk of this demand. So I would put that very much at the top of the list of what we could all work on next and help each other accomplish.
Sounds like a great idea. Who's got the ball?
I'm not sure that needs to be public funded either.
Somebody needs to pursue that.
But I think we need a framework that makes that kind of thing possible.
Also, one thing.
I'm sorry.
Wouldn't the people that are demanding these certificates have, as our commissioner loves to say, have a skin in the game in actually funding these programs? I'm an employer. I would. But I think we've got to educate employers about how to possibly do that. I think that's...
Yeah. And that was I brought up the funding issue earlier, and it's always an issue. It's,
no matter how much you have, you need
more.
Yeah,
more's better. So one of the things that I think would, besides getting rid of duplication, we talk about those things, there's ways to probably be more efficient. And I think everybody recognizes that we're working toward that, but there's more that can be done. Speeding up the pace with which you can get certain credentials so that you don't have to pay twice, which you could pay once. These things can be done. One thing on the funding side that we need to, and this goes to Walter, who stepped out, his point. Part of our challenge is to create a clear vision of where we're going to go as a state and how we're going to get there. And I believe that when you do that, people would be willing to support it. Businesses would be willing to support it, and individuals would be willing to support it. But a fragmented approach with no clear pathway, I love the idea of talking about paths versus silos. if we can articulate a pathway to success for both individuals and our state, then you can more easily put the issue of funding on the table. Okay, so it's hard to go tackle funding when you think things are fragmented and siloed and perhaps not as efficient as they could be. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get everybody in the room, and others in the Board of Regents supported us and wanted to get everybody in the room. I'm very pleased that there seems to be a lot more interaction than I had anticipated thus far. And I think the direction that you're outlining is starting to articulate what that vision might be. So articulating that vision well and doing the policies that back that also then puts on the table the funding issue. And it's not just a take away funding issue, it's what could we do with more? What could we do with more? So I appreciate the presentations today.
So, Superintendent White, I know you'll be wrapping up your career tour here in the next couple of weeks, and I'm thinking back to the big picture. It's to reiterate Mr. Romer. I mean, to get to this level with the interaction is fantastic, and I've learned a lot as to what's taken place. What can we do short-term path forward to take this and outline some goals in the near term? Or some action items to get us to build upon this energy, and maybe it's going to take a while to get the pathways all established and get it all aligned. But how do we leave here today and get some measurable items that we can do as a group together? What BESE needs to do, what Regents needs to do, kind of solidifying the vision that you've laid out here, so that we can really capitalize on the opportunity.
Well, I should say first, I think that the relationship between economic development, higher ed, and the Workforce Commission probably is a little bit further along, and I would, just to be blunt, I think we're a little bit late to the party. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say that I think our work is lagging, and we're kind of building ourselves into a system that they have in many respects already articulated. Okay. That's just because I think the BESE was focused on other things. The department was focused on other things primarily, and that's where we are. But in terms of our work, we are actually tomorrow we're hosting our first, what we're calling our Jumpstart webinar, which is we are suggesting that there be regions across the state that are able to step up and create these career packages, these sequence of courses through their higher education system, their high schools, and their local industry, that we then treat those as kind of laboratory sites, and that ultimately a set of policies that ensure that there's adequate funding, that ensure that there's appropriate incentives through accountability, and then ensure that the academic policies, diploma, promotion, testing, and otherwise are in place, are brought to BESE and are brought to the legislature next spring, so that you can take the lessons you've learned from the Jumpstart work in those specific districts and regions and actually have a policy environment that's conducive to scaling those pathways across the state.
To follow up with that, John, is there anything that we have, because I know that we're looking at releasing maybe the area of concentration requirements because we want to make sure that we don't have any policies that are prohibitive to the work. Are there any on the post-secondary side that we need support from the Board of Regents on in order to make this possible for our districts and for the others in their community?
Well, I think the biggest one Jim mentioned before, which is articulation agreements, which our state actually has in a very good place, meaning that the credits are portable from place to place. And you could certainly speak more on that, Jim, as well. I would say it's not exactly a Regents issue, but I believe TOPS Tech is a critical unhinging issue in all of this, because it is a funding stream that is meant to create the incentives for what TOPS creates in our four-year setting, and the incentives work. I mean, it's just very, very clear. You talk to kids, the TOPS incentives work. We tried to make them better in this legislative session, but where the financial incentive is, the kids will go. Unfortunately, for TOPS Tech, you have a lot of money, and it's gated through academic proficiency requirements that prohibit a lot of the kids who need access to our technical schools most from achieving the funding while they're in high school or while they're after high school. So I believe this is a huge problem. It doesn't all solve what Mr. Romer was raising regarding the funding issue, but it essentially means there's money on the table from the legislature that we are not putting into technical education because of a certain policy. Now, you can argue the pros and cons of that, but I believe we need to take that issue on, or the funding is going to continue to be a problem.
But that's an issue that we have to take on with the legislature, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But I would advocate that probably our 4 agencies and 2 boards working together would be able to take that issue on. And frankly, it's a logical thing. We took TOPS on for the 4-year college path last term. We're going to take TOPS Tech on this semester, or this session. I think this should be a major priority for both boards if we want to get this right.
Ms. Cope, what I may ask of you is, because I'd like to be able to take this presentation, maybe massage it some, and start using it at more the regional, local levels to generate conversation and to build consensus. So probably the appropriate thing is for us to work through you to refine it some, maybe to gear it to a presentation.
Yeah, we're happy to work with you on that, Mr. Gio, and hopefully our partner agencies will
Sure.
be able to help us get data, since we own none of the content in this PowerPoint.
Thank you.
And I'll say, for the Board of Regents, we like to we perform at small parties and weddings, so if you need us to come and be with you for a presentation, we'll be glad to do that.
Thank you.
Can we use that money to help fund all this work?
Well, I want to thank President Romer and the BESE board for an excellent presentation and content. Thank you, presenters, for your hard work and the discussion today. One of the things that these joint meetings, of course, I feel this way about our Board of Regents meetings as well, but maybe more so when we're together with you guys, is it amazes me when you collect a lot of bright people with a lot of different backgrounds and histories, and they come to bear on particular issues, the remarkable insight you get and the breadth of knowledge. And it reaffirms to me that, when we talk about things and work together and focus, we're going to achieve success, and that's going to all work to the benefit of the state and the kids. So thank you very much for your attendance and participation, and have a safe drive home. Thank you.